that I made. So it's a mix of fantasy and real anatomy, but it's all just rubber. It's all fake. Enjoy your pizza, please. While you eat that. Yeah, here's a demon makeup that I worked on with a whole group of people. I was just one of the artists that worked in a team of like 4 or 5 people for a movie that was made in northern Minnesota a few years ago. Here's a fun one. This was, I don't know if you remember Sarah Palin. She was the governor of Alaska, and a model making company wanted me to make a Sarah Palin zombie. So, I don't know why, but there it is. So I got to do a portrait sculpture that's all from clay. It's all from photographs, and then kind of zombify it there. This is something I did a few years ago where I was making these pumpkin carving characters where I would sculpt something and make a model and then make basically a plastic yellow face that you could stick into a real pumpkin. I call these petrified pumpkins. This was one of my harebrained schemes to make $1 million. I think I lost about $100 on that one. But anyways, it's pretty neat. So, a lot of people will ask, well, how did you learn all this? How did you learn to make these things? And I did go to the university. I did get a bachelor's degree. I majored in philosophy of all things. That was one path I went, one of my many practical interests, philosophy and makeup effects. But I ended up going back into makeup effects, and I didn't get formally trained. I didn't go to college for makeup per se or sculpture. I learned all this kind of as a hobbyist. So I know I grew up in the 1980s. And that's when there was a lot of magazines like the ones you see here in books on how to do makeup and monster makeup and what have you. And as much as this looks like it's kind of like silly kid stuff, and it is, and that's partly why I like it, it also had lots of technical steps of how do you make the molds? How do you use the different materials, the different rubber materials and the paints and all that stuff? How do you actually make this stuff? And so when I found like this book in the middle, Techniques of Three-Dimensional Makeup, it kind of opened up this whole world to me that this was possible. This thing that I had seen behind the scenes videos of and specials, that you could actually make this kind of stuff in your garage or your basement or what have you. So I started to learn, I started to go along with that, and it just kind of kept going. There was always something new to learn, and I just kept following it. So the people who do this kind of monster makeup, creature effects, it's a variety of skills that we tend to focus on and try our best to master. And so I've got a few listed here and some examples of some crazy zombie creatures and things I've done in the past. So the one thing that, even though it's fantasy, we really focus on hyper realistic sculpture. I try to do the most realistic sculpture work and paint work I can. It's always something that you're learning, you're getting better at. But that's the focus. We really have really high standards in the movie effects world. So there's the artistic part of that, which is the sculpture and the painting. And then there's the technical side, which is the mold making. And how do you cast these things in rubber? How do you make them out of silicones and all these weird materials that, that have certain requirements that in order to make them work? Well, certain paints only work on some materials. So as you explore this, you learn all the technical stuff of what type of paints you can use and how to do all this so it works, so it doesn't all fall apart when you're showing it to your friends or whatever. So lots of stuff to learn to do something like this. And I've been learning this since I was a teenager. So years and years of practice and study, and it's all for fun, but it takes a lot of attention. So, that whole world, again, sorry, I'm not doing a very good job warning you, am I? But yeah, this is again a rubber dissected rat there. It's all fake, it's all rubber. It's just using photos to make something look real and gross. And when you're into Halloween and horror movies, you like things that look pretty gross. So there's that. Then there's lots of fantasy sculpture. So it's a mix of fantasy and reality, so we'll go past that one. Okay. So another aspect of the movie effects world is it's very collaborative. So does everybody know what collaborative means? Collaboration is when a whole bunch of people work together. So it's not one person doing everything. And this is a really good example, I think, where you can see me there working with my friend Ryan, who's a sculptor and a makeup artist. He works on lots of movies. And we worked with an artist in St. Paul, Minnesota, this this guy, Chris Ballas, who's a really phenomenal artist, for this movie project where they needed this demon character. So Chris knew us and got us all together, and I did some of the sculpture, and then Ryan would come in and work on my sculpture parts. I would work on what he did. So you have to learn to work with other people, and that it's not all yours. You got to kind of mix all of your styles and the way you do things so you get one look for the character, because that's what it's all about, is making a really, you know, fun, cool, exciting character that everyone's going to be wowed by when they see it in the film. And that's how this one worked out. So I can't say these are mine. This is just something I worked on with a whole crew of people. And that's again, it's the culture of that field that I learned by being into this whole world of makeup effects. People share ideas, they share techniques. So it's a very, very collaborative field, I think you could say. Okay, there's a warning. This is going to be another gross one here as I'm showing off all my horror and gross things. So I lived in the Twin Cities. I lived in Minneapolis most of my professional life. So as you might imagine, there's not a lot of film effects jobs in the Twin Cities, but once in a while something would come through and I'd get to work on it while I was doing other projects. So this is an example of one of the horror things. Okay, turn away if you don't like gross stuff, but if you like gross stuff, look really close. So this was a character, an actor who got squished between two trees. So what you see here on the right there, that's the clay sculpture. So I took a clay model of this actor. Actually, I took a different actor. I re-sculpted the face because I had learned how to do portrait sculpture from other jobs I had done with years working in museum displays and so on. And it was just something I was interested in. So I was able to, kind of in a pinch, we didn't have much time, take a clay copy of one actor and make it look like this other actor. And then we had to kind of squish the clay sculpture and make it look like someone had gone through this horrible injury, where they got squished. And it's a little cartoonish, but okay, so here I'm going to show you the gross picture here. So this is what it looks like when it's all molded and made in silicone, and all the hairs individually punched into this silicone fake head, and it's all fake. So it's pretty gross. And there he is. Oh, he didn't make it. So, you know, sorry. It's one of the victims. So there's the actor. See, he's okay. Everybody relax. It's all fake. It's all an illusion. But there's the actor there with the dummy with the injured head there, posing with. I'm sure he sent that home to mom. Yeah, so that's the kind of things that we'll do. Okay. Another thing that I'll end up doing using all these skills is I've been lately working with a friend of mine in Wisconsin who makes silicone masks. So I'll do a sculpture in clay of a character, and it's on top of a form of a person's head, but it's kind of shaved down so it's going to fit snug on them. So I do the sculpture and then we mold it. And I've got a few pictures of how that process is done. But you can see this is the final silicone mask that he's wearing, acting like an old witch or something. But that's the kind of stuff, some of the stuff we can do with all these technical skills. So this is a gross out mummy zombie guy. And so here again, you can see the sculpture. So the sculpture's on a form. And then, okay, so here's the sculpture. And here's my friend who is a mold maker. She started to make the mold. So what we do to make a mold is you can't just cover, you have to cover the sculpture in some sort of a hard material or material that gets hard in order to make a copy out of this soft silicone rubber, like some of the things you see in front here. So what we have to do though is we have to separate the two halves. We have to make it in two halves. Otherwise we'll never get that sculpture out of there. So you can kind of see the step-by-step where she builds a clay, what we call a dividing wall. So we've got to make kind of a edge or a cutting spot between the two. So she's laid that out, and then she puts this material, this epoxy material. Again, it's one of these materials that we had to learn how to work with. And it's kind of a gooey, material, like a glue almost, or like a plastic. And then it hardens because of the way the chemicals react. And then eventually you take that off of the sculpture. So this is after layers of that stuff has been brushed onto the model and it's all hardened. And so she's now taking that off. So you're seeing the negative of the sculpture there. And then when you put it all back together, you can fill it with any material like a silicone rubber. So silicone rubber, without getting too into it, it starts off as a liquid, kind of like a honey goo. You mix up this stuff, you put color in it, and then you put it inside the mold, and then the spot between there's an inside form, and then there's that negative form we saw. So the spot between those two is where the clay used to be, but the clay has been all removed. So when you fill it with this rubber material, when it hardens basically, or turns, it's rubber, but it's catalyzes is what we call it. Then that's how you get your rubber copy in the shape of what the sculpture was. And so here it is all painted up, and here's an actor wearing it, acting goofy like the Phantom of the Opera or something, off to go scare people at a haunted house or what have you. So it's just like a rubber mask. You ever see a rubber mask at a store, except this is a silicone and it fits really tight, kind of like a makeup. So that's the thing I've been doing on the side as well, using all my special effects and sculpture skills. So another thing that I did, and I think I think my career is a good example of how you can go in one direction, and then if you sort of keep your mind open of where else you could explore and use your skills, you can end up working in all kinds of different areas. So I worked in the museum display world for about 10 years. So while I was making rubber masks and weird monster heads and things like that for fun or for a small project or a little movie project, I was doing this as my full-time job, where I was making like a California condor model. When I used to look like that. And, lots of sculptures, lots of characters, lots of animal models. And so I did that for about 10 years. Again, it's sculpture, it's realism, it's a lot of the technical skills. So I learned a lot doing this work too that I'm able to apply. There's just a few more examples because pictures are nice to look at. So these are all the cat and then this bighorn sheep. They're all, there's no hair on there. It's all a rigid, what's called an epoxy material. So it starts out as a putty, kind of like clay that hardens. And then we paint it to look like hair. So again, it's kind of another illusion that we were creating for the museum world, because we had to make something that was really strong and durable so people could climb on it and kick it. And that's what they do at museums, apparently. So we had to do that. Another thing I learned and I worked on when I was doing museum exhibits was portrait sculpture, which is kind of its own challenging field, where you're taking I gathered all these photos of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And then using those, I made this clay model, what's called a likeness. So something that's going to look just like the person, to make a statue of him. So you can see that's just the sort of reference material that we use. Like I tried to get every photo I could find of FDR for this. And here's the final sculptures. Here's FDR, and then there's Dwight Eisenhower too. We did a statue of each of those presidents for this exhibit in Washington, D.C. And there you can see the statues with a couple other things I did when I worked at Split Rock Studios, which was the museum display company. So yeah, again, wide variety of things, but they all stem from that interest in special effects and movie monsters, things like that. Just a couple more examples of things I did. I got to do a lot of character work too. So I did these guys are pretty fun. This is for Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. And here you can see all these characters I created out of clay for this sort of cartoon-like exhibit that the designer had. But again, this main point is to show the variety of the kind of work that you can do when you work in different fields. Well, if that wasn't enough, in about 2015 or so, I got involved in the medical simulation world because I wanted to move back toward the special effects kind of work that I really love to do, using sculpture and silicones and more realism. So I had always kind of looked into other fields other than movie effects because I wasn't going to move out to Los Angeles, New York. I wanted to stay here. So I thought, well, maybe this is an option. So I found out I really like doing medical simulation models. And so here's some examples of some things I worked on for a company in Minneapolis called Seven Sigma, but they were making mannequins, they call that. And they're a tool to train someone on how to put the tubes down someone's throat, basically, to help them breathe in surgery or an emergency situation. It's called intubation. So these are all sculpted. These are all sculpted from scratch as clay sculptures that we made molds of and made silicone copies of. And so here's an example of this adult male one where I sculpted all that in clay, and you can see the kind of detail. It's all hand sculpted stuff. guess maybe I'm trying to show off a little bit here, but the point is that this is the kind of like expectations of realism that I had anyways from my love and training in the makeup effects world. And so even the lips, it's kind of one of those things when you're into this stuff, you get into like, I'm going to make every little detail of the lips and make it look super real. And then I can show off to my artist friends like, oh, look, I sculpted all that. Aren't I great? So anyways, that's the kind of stuff that we would spend a lot of time on. And here's a bunch of those masks after they're done and they're ready to be put on mannequins and sent out to hospitals and places that train people. Another thing we did is we were making so this is the inside of your lungs, basically the tubes that go from your mouth down and branch out into your lungs. And I made this all by hand in wax. So this is all done before I had any access to all of the patient scans and the stuff that we have here at Mayo Clinic that I use every day for making models like this. So the main point here is I used to do it the hard way. I used to do it all by hand and using references. Now I would start off with a model that looks like that, that's actually made from a patient's scan. So it's very, very accurate. But I had to go through the rough world of wax carving and polishing to do that. It was still fun. So in about 2021, I got hired here at the Mayo Clinic to do a similar kind of work, but I'm working at the anatomic modeling unit. So the anatomic modeling unit here at Mayo Clinic uses this. You ever heard of a CT scan or an MRI? These are when people go into these big machines and it basically takes x-rays for your whole body, right? So then what you end up with is all of those forms, your skeleton and a lot of the organs and all that stuff. And you can take those and then you can make a 3D model from there. And so they have a whole 3D printing department that uses all these different 3D printing machines. So I'll show some examples of some of those, but you can see here like how we start off there on the upper corner where that's the imaging. So that's what the engineers use. So I work with a whole team of people that take those images, those flat images there, and then there's software that can go through that, and every single layer it can kind of rebuild it. So it rebuilds someone's skull in this case. So we take that, and then the surgeons and other people here will say, well, for a case, we need to see the skull of this person. Then maybe they have a tumor or they have something else that needs to be fixed or operated on. And to have a model of it, it helps them to do a better job and to help the patient have better outcomes. Because of course, if you can see where everything is in relation to everything else, it's a lot easier than when you're looking at it on a black and white kind of X-ray. That is what you get from a CT. So that's kind of the foundation of everything we do here in our department at Mayo, is we use all of that data and we make models for patients to help in surgeries and other things. So here's some examples there of different models we made. I got some close-ups, and there's all these different printers that we have at the lab. So we can print in a variety of materials too. So we can use, some printers will print a clear material. So you can see in this case where you can see basically like the the vein in the top of the head, the sagittal sinus that's called. But so you can create a model of that, and then so then when they're doing their surgery, they have something that's like a map. So then with whatever they have to do, they have a tool that helps them to do their surgery. So we do things like that. It depends on what's needed. Here's some cases where we have to kind of recreate someone's skull, the shape of their cranium. So one of my colleagues will make this model, and she'll work with the surgeons directly. We're right in the hospital, so the doctors will come right up, and they'll sit with the technical person, the engineer, on the computer, and they'll say, this is where I want to make these cuts, and they'll work with them. And then we'll produce these models, and so we can create custom tools for the surgeons for whatever they need for their case. This is my colleague, Tori Sears. She did all this work here. And this is just, another angle of that one. So big variety too. We got lots of different cases, and Mayo Clinic gets cases that other hospitals probably don't ever see, or maybe would see once in years and years, decades, where we get these really unique cases all the time. So my interest in anatomy and learning all the different all the different veins and the structures of the heart, all this stuff. Yeah, I get to learn all this stuff while I'm there. So I might be making models for training somebody or something else, but I get to learn all this stuff and see all these, to me, really cool models of anatomy. It's pretty amazing stuff. So this is all stuff that we've produced at the Mayo Clinic for particular cases to help patients and help surgeons to help these patients out. So another thing we do, this is a really cool one. So I've got the model printed over there on the table, which you can come up and look at afterward. But we also have a way where we can take a specimen. So we can take like a brain, and they would photograph in the past before, but our medical director, Dr. Morris, he had the idea of, well, why don't we get a device that can make a 3D model that can scan these specimens so they're preserved and they can be used for teaching, and then we can print from those scans. So here's an example of the hemisphere of a brain that's been scanned, and so this was from a real brain, and they scanned it, and that's right, I have plenty of water, and then we could make a 3D model from that. Well, reason partly why I include this is because when I saw this, I thought, well, if you can take a real specimen and then you can make a 3D printed model from that, there must be a way where I can do it by hand myself if I want to make something. And I kind of thought, well, how do you do that? And I guess that's, part of my attitude coming at this. I wasn't really trained in any of this, but my attitude was, well, just because I don't know how to do it doesn't mean I can't know how to do it. Doesn't mean that it takes a lot of it, it's something I can't learn. So one of the things I asked was like, well, how is the color put on that model? And I found out it's this thing called a texture map. So basically, without getting too technical, all that color, when the scanner scans that brain specimen, for example, it takes all that color and it basically makes a flat picture, just like a picture you would have on your phone or something. So it makes that flat picture, and it has it all set up so the places where that flat photo are, they kind of wrap back around the model. So when I saw that, I kind of thought, well, I'm going to start making models that are full color. I'm going to learn how to do all that. And that's one of the things I learned. And I'll show you an example a little bit here. So another thing we can do is another type of scanning. We can use a surface scanner. So this is a device that you hold in your hand and you kind of go over the surface of the model or whatever it is. So in this case, we had this skull specimen. And so you can see there, and then it also captures the color. So I've got a printout of that skull right on the table, and we made a really small version of it. But it shows how you can capture anything in the real world and then make replicas of it or modify it in the computer. All stuff that I've learned while I've been working at Mayo. So there's a picture of me holding the skull model. I've got it over there again. You can come check it out after my talk. So where I come in is, of course, I'm a traditional sculptor with the background in museums and special effects. So I do use that for the kinds of things I do here at Mayo Clinic. So here's some examples of these basically surgery trainers for a particular type of procedure where basically they're taking the really small vessels and tying them together. They have to take one section, maybe they'll take some of the, well, I won't get into the details, but basically they'll take something and they'll have to through whatever they're putting in. So it's a skill that the surgeons want to practice. And so someone had requested that we make models that would help them to practice. And instead of just on a flat board, they're practicing, they're practicing, on the surface, on the forms of what they're going to be experiencing when they're doing surgery. So of course that gave me a chance to make these, nice sculptures of someone in the middle of surgery and so on. Normally they wouldn't have both sides of the chest open like that, but they wanted to be able to practice on the left side and the right side. So I did them at the same time. Just some of the design things you do. Okay, so I think I might have some color photos of these, which might be a little on the gross side. So let's see. Well, here's this. This is gross if you don't want to make molds. But these are fiberglass molds. So again, I'm using the same types of techniques we use for making silicone masks and things like that. And we're using them to make these surgery trainers. So same kind of technical skills and process that I would use for all the special effects stuff. Same kind of thing, but now we're using it for a tool for surgeons. So there's the molds with fiberglass layers, so they're really tough, they won't break. And then here's that one model, and I've got another version that's got better paint job of that model on the table here with all that anatomy showing up. It's all fake. And you can see it's in multiple parts. So I learned how to design these things where some things are silicone from the sculpture, some of them are 3D printed parts, and it all kind of goes together. And here's that chest one where this is kind of cool because it shows how I put color in the silicone rubber before I put it in the mold. So before I paint or anything, I'm already giving it color. So that's there you can see everything pre-colored. That's just the silicone before it's painted, and then there I am painting it. And here's the final piece. And again, does anybody think that's gross? You think that's gross? It is. Well, thanks. Thank you. Okay. Well, yeah. I mean, surgery is gross. I like this stuff, but that's me. So as well as doing the traditional kind of work, I also use all of this computer modeling and all this computer stuff, like I alluded to a little earlier, to make 3D prints to show all of that, basically all the paint work and all of the realism of the surface. So here's a close-up of a train. I'll get into this, and I've got another a part of that over there, which you can take a look at up close. And kind of here's like the process of how I built something like that. So you can see I start with patient models. This is all taken from someone's CT scan. So you can see we get that's the heart there in the red in the middle with the aorta and the branching arteries and so on. And then the skeleton, of course, the rib cage and the pelvis and the rest of it. So I have all that to start off with. And then I have to say, okay, what do I need to build in order to make something for these surgeons? So they wanted something to be able to have a trainer as if they're in an emergency surgery, and they got to clamp this big artery that goes from your heart, and it kind of does a loop, and it goes all the way down your spine and branches out to your legs. That's the descending aorta. So I had to make this. So I made this form to match all of that anatomy there. And that's all something I made in this software called ZBrush, but it's a computer sculpting software, basically. So I go from that, and then now I had that form, so that I said, okay, I want to be able to paint color on it. So I had to break it all up in all these sections, and I won't go into all this technical stuff, but there's a lot of computer technical things I've learned working here, and one of them is a process called UV unwrapping. It's not very exciting or fun, but basically it's a way that you can take your 3D model and flatten it all out, so then that photo can be reapplied and then printed. So here's the two halves of this, and that's this section here of inside your ribs. It's called your thoracic cavity. So on the left side, that red part there, that's where the heart would be, and the rest is kind of where your lungs would be. So I knew I had to make that for this model. So I made that part, and here it is all flattened out. So all those colors get flattened out, and that's where the color gets created, which I think is a cool process. This is a kind of a cool video. So just to get the concept, here's the surface that's got the heart on it of that model, and here's what it looks like when it's all flattened out. Okay, watch this. So see how it's basically like it's unwrapped. It's flattened out, and now all that color the computer will know where it's supposed to go on the model, and it'll print it all out that way. And I thought that was really cool when I learned that, because that meant I could do stuff like this. I could, instead of painting with a brush, I can paint with the computer. So now I have this little what's called, well, it doesn't matter. It's called an alpha, but it's a pattern that you can use almost like a stamp. So I'm able to kind of drag these out on the surface and make all these little vessels and make all this realistic stuff. And so, that's something, it allows me to use all the tricks and tools of the computer modeling world and what they call texturing in order to make a 3D printed model that has all this realism. And I can repeat it, I can print it multiple times, and so on. So I won't get into the technical stuff about topology and all this, but this is all stuff I learned while I was doing this. And here it is after the model was finished. Here it's printing on one of our fancy printers that prints in full color. And it prints like a little plastic drops almost. And then as it's going, it's hardening them. So if you've ever used an inkjet printer, it's kind of like that, except it's printing layer after layer, and then it's stacking those layers, and that gives you your 3D model. And so there it is printing. Isn't that exciting? And so here's the comparison. These are the two halves of this kind of rib cage section, right? And they're opened up, and because they're going to go back together, because I have to print them separately and I put them back together. So here's what my model looked like. And then here it is off of the 3D printer. And that probably also is kind of gross, but you know, it's anatomy. You're at Mayo Clinic. You're just going to have to deal with it. Yeah, so I was really excited to see this. So this meant I could paint anything in the computer and I could print it on our printer, and it would look just like I had painted it. So now that opened up a lot of possibilities for design and so on. And there it is. Oh, and this is also kind of gross, I guess. I don't know. Is this gross? This doesn't gross me out, but okay. Well, you guys will have your tolerance for gross stuff is going to go up just a little bit, you know? So I think it's a good skill to have. But it's all fake. It's all rubber stuff. It's all models, and it's all put together. So this is a combination of the 3D printed part and then silicone rubber parts that are all glued together. So very similar to what we would do if we were making this for a movie and wanted to show a surgery or something like that. You got to make the stuff look real, and then it has to all work. Okay, so there's that. So that's the idea. So a cool thing that I was able to do once I knew how to put color on 3D printed models, something I've always wanted to be able to do is make a realistic eye. And I have done it in a traditional way where you paint a surface and then you put it in a mold, and then the clear material you put over that, and then you polish it and it looks like an eye. Well, this is all 3D printed. So I've got a copy of that up on the table that you can see after this presentation. And so I'll just show you quickly how I did that. So I've got a cool tool in my software called Spotlight. So I'm able to take a photograph of an iris there, and I can just basically like glue it onto my model surface. And that's what this is an example of. So instead of having to even paint it, I was able to kind of cheat and just take a photograph and like stick it right on that part of the eye model. And so once I did that, I had this full color eye, and it has different layers on it. You can see the different layers here. So that's, again, it's a mix of the art and the technical. You know, you have to develop your art skills, but then you have to learn how do you put all these things together so it's going to work. So you can even see there's what's called threading, but that's for a bolt to go inside there or a screw to go in there to hold the eyeball model. So anyway, so that's the different parts of that model, which I think are pretty neat. So I was able to use that for a training model that we made. I'll start going kind of fast here because I usually have more to show than I have time. But so this is a good example of how I used that artistic eyeball model. I was able to integrate it into the model, which again, I have a sample of up here. So this is all from a patient's MRI. That's the blood supply kind of in the neck, and that goes up into their ocular area, and then their eyes with the muscles that control your eyes. And so you can kind of see that what you get from the imaging and from the process called segmentation, which takes that imaging and then it makes a 3D model from it. You can see they're kind of blobby, you know, they don't really look like, if you look at what muscles look like, they don't really look like that. So what I use that as kind of a starting point. And so here's the eyeball with the ocular muscles. There's 6 muscles that control your eye, or that you use to control your eye. And so that's what I started off with. And that's kind of where we were at. When my department didn't have an artist like myself, this was kind of the limit of what we were able to represent within our department. So me having all this artistic background, I'm able to say, okay, this is going to be a guide for my sculpture now. So I'm going to make a 3D sculpture in the computer using this as a guide. And so that's what I did. I used that to give me a better sense of where everything would be and what the sizes are and so on. And then I used lots of reference material, and this is what I ended up sculpting. So this is kind of the simplified version. And then here's all the nerves added that other people had created from other projects. And there's other parts of the anatomy there. And then I started making it look a little nicer and clean it up and smooth everything out, add some other features. And then there's my final model where I've got it all painted in the computer. I've got a gland there. That's like where it creates your tears, the lacrimal gland. And I put a lot of color on the surface of the eye. And that's what I ended up with. And this is just my computer model. And then we said, okay, well, we want to make an actual model out of this for a procedure that couple of the doctors were wanting to share with their colleagues. And so we got all that stuff. There's another angle of it. And then here it is being printed on one of our other printers. It kind of works like an old record player. It goes in circles, and every time it passes, it's putting another layer on. And then it produces this hard model with all the colors, everything that you created with this, what's called a support matrix. So it's kind of a gummy material, as you can see. Because every time you're 3D printing something, you got to remember that you have to have a surface to print on top of. So if something's like a ball, like an eye, every layer has to have something that is printing on top of it. So as it starts to widen out, you have to have some material that's removable that it can print on. So that's what all that gummy stuff is. So that's that model. And then another part of this was making a surface skin. So I wanted to make this face for this model very realistic. So I started with this model, which I didn't make. This I got from a company that does kind of 3D graphics and things like that. But it had all this really great skin detail. So I found a way that I could take that skin detail and I can transfer it onto another face. So another cool like 3D skill that I've learned since I've worked there. So there's my model with all that skin detail from that other one transferred onto it. And it's similar to how we do color, where this black and white map, this is kind of like the detail map. So it wraps that back around, and then wherever it's dark, it kind of digs in, and wherever it's light, it leaves it alone. So it's called a displacement map. But this is another technical thing I've learned doing 3D modeling for Mayo Clinic models. The difference for me, though, is because I'm kind of in the physical world. Ultimately, I want to make a physical model. So I use all these 3D techniques in order to make something I can print. So my focus is a little different than the people who do CGI and things like that. So it's always kind of like learning, well, what can I do with these tools, even though they're not necessarily designed to do this? So I took that, and then I was able to make a mold, and here's my model. There's all this other stuff involved, how to make the base, and they wanted to be able to see the muscles of the eye. So we made clear forms for where the skull is around the eyes, that orbit, they call that. So there's that. You can kind of see how when it's all spread apart, like all these different components that all go together to make one model. They even had a little flashlight in it, so we could click the bottom, and then you would see, you'd be able to see better where all that anatomy is in the eye. And then in addition to all that, I had to design the mold to make the silicone face part. So that's what this is. And I've got that mold up here, and you can look at it up close and see all those little bumps of the skin detail that I was able to capture and then print. So 3D printed mold for a silicone face. So there's lots of different parts. There's a close-up where you can still kind of see all of that detail. And so that's what we ended up with. We had a silicone face with realistic eyes and the orbital muscles and all this stuff on the one hand. And then because I had all those models, I was able to make a separate model that had just the anatomy that showed without the skin of the face. You can see all the different components of the eye and all the anatomy in there and the vessels and so on. And so there you can see the ocular muscles that you use to control the direction of your eye. And there's from the top. So you can get a lot out of when you make a digital model. There's a lot of different uses for it. And so this was a good example. There's the light bulb we had in there. And there's the real close-up view of all that skin detail, which I love. And then there's another model that we made out of the same set. So every time you make a set like an eyeball, you can make it in different ways. And that's part of what's great about using digital and 3D printing is you can make a lot of different versions of the same set of tools, the same set of models that you create. And then there they are with their colleagues. It's a couple of Mayo Clinic doctors explaining this procedure, which I don't know if you want to know the details of it, but they take a needle and they put it right into the muscle of the eye so they can have a way to read the nerve for surgeries. So I won't go into the details of it, but it's pretty unique what they do. And so that was a tool for them to help explain to their colleagues what they do and how to do a procedure in a different way. So one last thing I've got here is this last summer, I did another model, which is a combination of using digital modeling and molds and lots of 3D printing and silicone to make lots of layers for kind of a complex face anatomy model. And you can just kind of see the process of everything that goes in here. So here's what I started off with from a patient scan. And then I started building up all the different layers of tissue. So here's the fat pads of the face. This is all created in the computer. And here's one of the glands, the parotid gland that's on the side of your jaw there, right here. And then here's all the vasculature, so the arteries and veins of the face. And then we had a model of the facial nerves, and we put that on there as well. You can see those little yellow lines. That's how you were able to feel things, is by the nerves of your face. And then here's my eye model, which you just saw. So I was able to take all that work and now put it into this model. So again, it shows what I think is really neat is once you build up a model of something complicated, like all this stuff of the eye, you're able to use it for many, many models to come. And so I was able to use this for that model. And then here's all the muscles of the face and neck. So these, again, were all modeled in the computer, and they're very simplified here. But I was able to add that too. And then here's some other stuff that the plastic surgeons care about, which are the different ligaments and so on of the face. And then here's their surgical spaces where they go between the layers of the face, but we don't need to go into the details of that. And then there's all the superficial face muscles. So all this stuff I would make at the computer and make a full set like this. And then so you can kind of see it in 3D. And then from there, I was able to edit that and then make this model. So this is the model that we had at this event. And I'll get right to, I'm just about done. We'll get right to your question. As a reference model and kind of like a first start to work with this plastic surgery group to see what would be useful for them. So we did this for this year, but next year I'll probably make some changes and update it according to what they need. So we can, again, make custom models for the surgeons and their colleagues, for what they want to show and help teach others. And so there's a picture of that. So this is all what we call a render. So this is a picture from all the digital models of all these different parts. That's all the face muscles. And then I made a mold of that because I was going to make that out of silicone. And so I got the mold sitting up here, which you can take a look at. And so there's the 3D printed model where I've got my realistic eye model. I've got all of those components mixed with all this other stuff I made. And then we also have made a silicone piece that sat on top of that. And then there they are at their conference examining it and critiquing it. And then you can peel it back and it looks kind of gross, like the fat layer. It's not all that accurate anatomically. It's a little bit of what's called a schematic. But anyways, and then here's something I'm just currently working on. I'm still doing monster sculptures and crazy stuff on the side. So thanks a lot for your attention. And I think we have about 10 minutes for questions. I'll just call on whoever I see. Go right ahead.
How long did it take you to make one of those sculptures?
That's a good question. Sometimes it can be months of work where I'm doing a little bit at a time and then I'm jumping back. And usually I have about 3 projects going on at once. So I'll do a little bit on this one and then I'll jump over to this other project. But yeah, sometimes it can take, sometimes it's real fast. It could be a week, couple days, but a lot of times it's months of work because all of those layers, not only do I have to make them look nice, but they have to be accurate. So I get lots of feedback from the doctor I work with and other people who tell me how to adjust things and make them a little bit more accurate. What's that?
How do you do that in a week?
Well, I'm not the fastest. So sometimes some things can go fast in a week. Sometimes it takes that face model I just showed was like all summer I was working on that. So sometimes I sneak in a little bit of time too, and I'll work on something I really like that I want to make look even fancier. And then I'm working on other projects in between. Okay, go ahead.
Do you ever have to make models for things on microscopic scales?
Oh, that's a good question. Not really. I haven't made anything that is microscopic. A lot of times, so there's a field called medical illustration, which a lot of times medical illustrators, and there's a group here at Mayo Clinic that are medical illustrators, and they'll make models. They'll make mostly illustrations for models for an animation, but they'll sometimes, make things that are like microscopic structures at the show to illustrate how a drug works or something like that. So not yet, but it'd be a cool thing to work on. Okay, up front here, go ahead.
Do you think the body or monsters?
That's a really, she asked if I prefer to do the human body or monsters. And well, I really like monsters, but I'm really fascinated by human anatomy. I try to learn as much as I can, but my heart will always be with monster making above all else. So monsters. Okay, go right ahead.
Those things that you make so realistic, like can you make such textures on them?
How do I make them look realistic? Well, it's years and years of looking at pictures of things like skulls and muscles and animals and faces. I really like human faces. And you try something and it's not right at first. And I think it's a really tough thing when you're an artist to be able to balance between looking at something and being excited about it, that you made like a really nice drawing or a sculpture, but then also looking at it and saying, okay, how can I make it better without saying, oh, it's no good and I quit. And that's something anybody who's an artist or who has tried doing artistic work, it's often something that we all struggle with, is trying to improve without beating yourself up and giving up too fast because you're frustrated. But it's years and years of work and being frustrated. Okay, let's go right ahead.
Can we see those things up close?
Sure, yeah. When we're done with question and answer, you can come right up and we can look at stuff up close and you can feel some of the rubber faces and things for sure. Yes?
Did it take you to make your longest model that you ever made? Like how long did
Well,
what was
that's a dangerous question because I have projects that have been going on for a couple of years probably. I've been making a model of basically it's like a doll of a 1-year-old baby for a procedure to train people on. And I've probably been working on that since I started in 2021. So things can go on. What happens usually is I work on something for a few weeks and then something else comes up and I start working on that, or there's a conference and I got to get that done by the end of the month. So I'm all over the place. So it can be years. It could be years.
I think we'll stop here. Let's thank our speaker again.
Thanks, everybody. Hope you enjoyed it.
This gives us time for anyone who wants to come down and touch a model. There's models down here and you can continue to ask questions. We're going to do this for about 5 minutes and then